Well, everybody, it is here. It has come. The end. Almost 30 years in the making. I'm talking about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2, The Final Reckoning, the sequel to Murder on the Orient Express. Yeah. So I went off and did a double feature today. Popped in my Blu ray, rewatched Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Immediately ran to the theater. 3 o'clock showing for Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. No longer Dead Reckoning Part 2 because apparently a change in title has some kind of bearing on how a movie is going to perform in the theaters. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about combined a nearly 6-hour film experience. They don't flow seamlessly into one another. There's a few month gap in between storylines, but for all intents and purposes, it is one continuous story. So we have the continuation here of Ethan and his IMF team pursuing what to do about the entity, the evil AI program that wants to take over the world. Now, I'll be bluntly honest here. The technical aspects that keep going back and forth about the AI's motives and or alleged motives, or what they perceive to be the motives, and the back and forth and the what's and who's and what's didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But it really didn't have to. I guess objectively, you've got Group A doing what they do. Group B could be any various form of domestic or foreign governments who always seem to align against Group A. And then let's just say miscellaneous Group C could be any number of random bad guys in play that might have an impact on said scenario. This is the Mission Impossible formula almost consistently. The only thing we're lacking is an agent or former agent gone bad. We get that a lot of the time. We don't get that every time, and that it's okay. I'm kind of glad when they don't do that, because how many times can you recycle that same thing? I am overall a relatively large fan of this franchise. I now, minus the one that just releasing today or tomorrow officially. I own them all. I've seen them all many times. I'll even go to bat for Part 2, which most people generally either hate or disregard as the weakest of the franchise. Comparatively speaking, trying to watch these as a conjoined unit, would I put one above the other as far as which is better? I can't. I understand a lot of the distaste for Dead Reckoning Part 1. It is overly bloated, overly long. Some aspects of it are too slow, too detailed. And I don't think you can necessarily tell a convincing suspension of disbelief story in which an AI is the antagonist of the tale, especially on this scale of things where we live in a completely digital world where if an AI gets into everything via the internet, or however you want to describe that, almost every human countermeasure would be nullified against that. And to immerse yourself in Dead Reckoning Part 1, you really have to apply the brakes of the suspension of disbelief considerably, because there are so many things going on that wouldn't actually be possible had this mostly all-knowing AI really been performing to the degree that they want you to believe in the story. It would have prevented our heroes from doing just about anything that they were doing to stop it. So if you're able to get all past that and move into the film and enjoy it, then great. That brings you into the sequel, where they continue on where everything left off, and events keep getting escalated. World governments are up at arms. Everybody wants to get their hands on this AI. They want to control it. They want to manipulate it to their own ends. And it's bringing tensions high within the nuclear world as far as potential nuclear Armageddon. But then at the same time, you also have this AI trying to take over and get its hands on controlling the entire world's nuclear arsenal. So you have every government wanting to press their own buttons and launch, but at the same time you have the AI wanting to get its hands on everything and launch simultaneously. And it's all on a clock, because allegedly that's the way an AI would work. because it's only logical to launch once you have everything under control, and somehow wiping out the entirety of human civilization is supposed to achieve whatever ends it's trying to attain, which we don't know. We can't know. Both these movies feel long, this one in particular, almost exhaustingly so, and I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. This is one that I'm going to sit and I'm going to stew on for quite a while. I did find it overall fairly satisfying. It, particularly when taken in a conjoined unit, there are things that occur in this film that I feel have kind of been a long time in coming, in the sense that the stakes are more palpable in a way that they've never been before, and they should be. However, the overarching storyline, I think, is excessive for this kind of film. When you're, instead of looking at rogue agents or terrorist groups or either individuals or groups that pose some kind of significant threat to world peace, world order, or whatever the case would be, and you have another group going in to infiltrate, take over, prevent the sale of a weapon or something, that's perfectly attainable, I think, for a storyline in an organization such as this. But when you're doing something on a global scale against an AI entity, I think it's way overly ambitious for what this is. I don't think it's appropriate for this particular kind of franchise to tackle. You know, if you were to compare something like this to, like, let's say, a Terminator, where you get an AI that takes over everything and essentially just wipes out the majority of the human population, and then you have the human survivors trying to band together and fight an actual ground war against the physical manifestations of this AI. To me, that's a much more plausible scenario than something like this, because I don't think that there would be any means or form of actual resistance on the human front at this level. It just doesn't add up. I will say, I'm going to go spoiler alert for as long as this is on the screen. The one aspect that I was disappointed was introduced into these two films, and that being S.I. Morales' character, Gabriel, being linked to Ethan Hunt's past and being a catalyst for things that we've never heard of before. I didn't like that. It was too late in the game to be anything more than a tacked on novelty, and it didn't work. And I was expecting at some point in this film, for at least since it was introduced, for it to go into some kind of detail. Well, we don't get that. If you were looking forward to that, it doesn't happen. We don't know who Gabriel is. We don't know what Gabriel came from. We don't know how Gabriel is exactly tied to Ethan's past, beyond the fact that it resulted in the death of someone, a woman whom he apparently cared for. We don't know who she is. We don't know what it was involved. We have no knowledge whatsoever of that story, and we're not given any. All this weight is put on character significance of who Gabriel is, with zero payoff whatsoever. And ultimately, that was probably my biggest disappointment, because if you're going to put this in here, do something with it. But at the end of the day, he could have been random, no name, intelligent operative, or just bad guy in general going about his business. He didn't have to have any ties, because those ties were completely irrelevant. They had no bearing whatsoever on the story, and that pissed me off. So, Ethan's, not his sense of vengeance, but, there's that underlying urgency for him to take Gabriel down in the first film, and him having to fight against the temptation of killing him versus using him to accomplish their mission. Why? At the end of the day, it didn't matter, because those connections were never established for the audience. Obviously, personal issue for him, and that's great, but if they're not going to share with us, then it makes no difference at all. So you sit through 2 hours and 49 minutes worth of this movie, also directed by Christopher McQuarrie, same as the original one, last one, and same as Top Gun Maverick. These guys can craft a good story, but these Reckoning films might ultimately be the most disappointing for me as far as the entirety of this franchise. If I were to sit down right now and say, okay, I would actually take Mission Impossible 2 over either of these any day. I would. Just going to say. Why? Because it's a more attainable story. Yeah, okay, it's got the John Woo dramatic flares and visual flares and everything else, but you know what? That's a John Woo. It's not overboard. It's just very stereotypical John Woo. And so you say, okay, well, it doesn't fit into the overall equation of the feel or the tone of Mission Impossible movies. Okay, cool. But then you look back at what the context when that was made. That was the second film. There was no tone or context for it. You had first film, its own unique entity. Second film, its own unique entity. Third film, its own unique entity. For that first 3 films of this trilogy, if you want to call it that, each had their own unique individual flavor. There was no real connective through line at all between any of them. It wasn't until Part 4, Ghost Protocol, where they took the formula from Part 3 and ran with it from there forward. So 1 and 2 are equally their own outliers in the franchise. But that being said, do I regret seeing it? No. Do I give it some dumb recommendation? Sure. Not an enthusiastic one, but I certainly don't regret sitting down and watching it. It did some cool things with humanizing Ethan, upping the stakes while at the same time giving him a more humanistic quality as far as his limitations. Now, it's never mentioned, but are they throwing in, let's just say, the age issue? Because, you know, Tom Cruise is getting up there. Obviously, he's in story, he's been doing this for over 30 years. It's starting to wear down on him, obviously. The man's still in great shape. He can still perform, but you have to be realistic about that as well. Can he, you know, keep up and kick ass against people half his age? Not always. Not without help. And that's okay, too. Anyway, excessively long rant, excessively long review. Overall, like I said, reasonably satisfied with some caveats, giving it some dumb recommendation on a subtle level, not an enthusiastic one. Don't regret seeing it. Will probably add it to my library. It will not be among the most rewatched in the franchise if I'm just plugging in a random. If I were going to go through a marathon them, of course, that would be part of it. There was nothing about this film that suggested a finale of the franchise, although that's what it's being promoted as. There's absolutely nothing about it that says, okay, we can't just, you know, if this makes money, let's go ahead and plug in for a part 9 and say, let's run with it now, because why not? There's no finality to this at all. There's no nail in the coffin, nothing closing the door. So, have you seen Mission Impossible, The Final Dead Reckoning Part 2 of Murder on the Orient Express? Let me know. What did you think? Word box. Are you going to see it? Word box. You want me to shut up? Word box. Good night, everybody. Say hi to Buddy on your way out. Bye.